Bonespear is well and alive. The nerfs haven't really been that crazy when it comes to Bonespear. With this guide, you will actually see how to build it to never have to worry about your resource and being able to do Uber Duriel as well as T100 Nightmare Dungeons very easily. Let's see how we achieve this in the skill tree. We will go with Bone Splinters, Enhanced Bone Splinters and Acolyte Bone Splinters to get even more crit chance than we already have. Take Imperfectly Balanced, 3 out of 3, just 1 in Unliving Energy. This time around, fully max Bonespear right here and Paranormal Bonespear. Very important to take this one because you get a free 5% increased critical strike chance, because the other one would give you Vulnerable, but that is covered with our aspect on the weapon. So the top one would basically do nothing, but instead the lower one just gives you 5% crit, and it splits into way more projectiles, but that is a topic that we are going to cover later on. Then we also go with Hued Flesh, 2 out of 3 in our leveling section of the build guide. That is going to change when we are going to the Ubers, for example, but this link will be down in the description and in the pinned comment below, so make sure to look through the Ubers as well, because there are slight changes for the build. Then next up, we want to have Blood Mist to have an Unstoppable, Corpse Explosion, Enhanced Corpse Explosion and Blighted Corpse Explosion to trigger some stuff that we will talk about in the Paragon board. Then next up, Grim Harvest to be able to use Fueled by Death, which is going to increase our damage by 9% for 6 seconds after we are consuming a corpse with our Corpse Explosion. Then Death's Embrace, Death's Reach, 2 in amplified damage while we are using our Iron Maiden with the Enhanced Iron Maiden, which is going to allow us to instantly refill our resource bar whenever you are pressing Iron Maiden. This works because whenever Iron Maiden is being applied to a target for the very first time and it's not already cursed with Iron Maiden, it's going to give you 5 essence. Since we are cursing a lot of mobs with this, the resource will basically jump to full every time you press this on a new unaffected target. Therefore, you never have to worry about resource, even during leveling. Then next up, we have Corpse Tendrils with the Enhanced Corpse Tendrils, very important against suppressor mobs, and also a huge damage multiplier on top of all the other stuff that we are getting. Then we want to have Reaper's Pursuit, which is going to be activated by our Shadow Blighted Corpse Explosion to get a little bit of that juicy movement speed that the Necros so desperately require. Then we want to have these in the bone cluster right here, and ideally you want Compound Fracture or Evulsion on your amulet as an additional passive. It doesn't matter which one you're taking, one or the other is completely fine. Then we want to have Inspiring Leader to get more attack speed, Stand Alone to get that juicy damage reduction, and Memento Mori because we are sacrificing everything, but we go over the sacrifices next after this section. And then obviously probably still the most OP keystone passive in the game, Ossified Essence. What's really nice here is that the Memento Mori is going to increase the sacrifice bonuses by 60%, which in turn means that our 20% all rest that we are going to get from the defenders is going to be increased to 32% all resistance. This combination is extremely important and very, very nice during leveling. When your resistances are not fully covered yet, it's going to make your life way, way easier. Next up, we have the Paragon board, and I'm not going to go into great detail here. It's best that you have a look at those yourself when you click the link down in the description or the pinned comment. What is really important here is we are running 5 Paragon boards with Control, Exploit, and Biber, Undaunted, and Essence, which is going to be a pretty nice setup, which is also changing just a little bit when we are doing Ubers, although that's not really necessary because Uber Duriel actually turned out being way easier than expected. So you can definitely run the same Paragon board for all of the content in the game. What I just want to highlight is that whenever you are leveling, it is really important that when you are unlocking your second Paragon board, so not the start one, but then Bone Graft, it's important to go for this cluster right here first. This is going to give us Essence on Kill, so every time you kill something, you are going to get 4 essence on kill from this cluster alone. And since we are killing so many mobs, your resource generation is going to go up tremendously on top of the Iron Maiden. So this will basically ensure that you will never run out of resource and can go ahead with spamming Bonespear constantly throughout your fights. Then what's also pretty important is the Flesh Eater passive right here. Consuming 5 corpses with our corpse explosion grants us 40% increased damage. This is very useful for Uber Duriel. This is also very useful if you are pushing T100 Nightmare Dungeons to prepare. You can actually prepare this before the fight actually happens to then just consume 1 corpse to instantly get the 40% damage bonus for 6 seconds. Because that is going to make the fights way, way easier. And it's actually something small that you have to pay attention to when you are doing Uber Duriel or the end bosses in the tier 100 Nightmare Dungeons. Apart from that, everything is very straightforward and not really complicated at all. Leveling the Paragon Glyphs is not that complicated. You just go by the order on which you encounter them on the Paragon board. So you start out with Control, then Exploit, Imbiber, Undaunted, and Essence. The good thing about Bonespear is that it requires basically nothing when it comes to aspects or uniques. Everything that you need is in your codex, and that is going to be starting out with the splintering aspect. You get that by clearing Ghoul Ran slums in dry steppes, which is also really important. And you also want Grasping Veins, which is also in the codex, unlocked by clearing Corrupted Grotto in Kyrgyzstan. And this combination actually makes the build already very powerful. And since those very powerful aspects are in the codex, Bonespear is definitely a very good build to level with, from even 1 to 100, although Blood Surge is going to be a little bit faster from level 1 to 55. Also, a link to Blood Surge is going to be down in the description if you are interested in that. Let's continue with the aspects and the gear. We want a Deathless Visage, which is not really because of the unique aspect or the unique effect, but more so because of the stats on the item. You don't really have a chance to roll critical strike damage with bone skills on your head slot, but Deathless Visage can do this. That's why we take it right here. Then we want a very defensive chest piece with total armor and 3 damage reduction stats with Disobedience. Then our gloves. And the most important stat right here is going to be the lucky hit chance to restore primary resource. That one alone is going to enable you to get rid of Iron Maiden completely and is basically going to single-handedly carry your resource generation, because the lucky hit chance of Bonespear is actually very high. We have 50%, and the lucky hit on the gloves is therefore going to trigger way, way more often than it would for other classes. Also, obviously, ranks of Bonespear, crit and crit damage. Here is the only aspect that is not in the codex, which is kinda important. That's the Serration aspect, which is going to just boost your damage. It's not a requirement, but definitely something that is nice to have. And that one definitely drops fairly often. Then we have a, again, very defensive pants slot with triple DR and total armor. Also, max life would be good. Same goes for chest, obviously, with might to further reduce the damage that we are taking. On the boots, you want the Wind Striker aspect to get that juicy movement speed on crit. Later on, when you have Metamorphosis unlocked, you want to change this to Ghost Walker. And that is also going to be reflected here in the build stages. So don't worry about that. You can actually see this when you're changing the build settings there. And on top of that, you want to have the movement speed on kill, essence cost reduction, and either 1 resistance or maybe even 2 if you still need them. Although the combination here with the all resistance and sacrificing the defender should have you covered. But if that is not the case, the boot slot right here is definitely something where you can get away with taking 1 more resistance slot. And in this case, you would get rid of the movement speed after killing an elite. Then next up on the neck, obviously Grasping Veins. And we want to have ranks of the Evulsion passive or the other passive that is right here, the Compound Fracture. Both of those are quite nice. Then we want to have movement speed, which is very, very important on Necro. The combination of movement speed on the boots and on the neck is actually making us a pretty fast wheelchair. And on top of that, we want essence cost reduction and damage reduction here on the neck. Then next up, Edge Masters on the ring while we are leveling, because that's also a codex aspect. And the rings are a combination of 5 things that you want to have: max life, crit chance, vuln damage, critical strike damage, and as you can see on the next ring, resource generation. Then this Edge Master part is going to be part of your aspects as long as you have Iron Maiden. And if you get the very rare ring with the exposed flesh, then you are already switching over to Decrepify. But again, that is going to be seen here when we go to endgame. You can actually see Decrepify is changing, and you also have the Edge Masters changing to an exposed flesh. I suggest you just click through these and have a look at what changes. But that's literally only the Iron Maiden to Decrepify, and then the Edge Masters to exposed flesh whenever you are lucky to find the exposed flesh at some point during your playtime. Then for the Necromancer class mechanic, we want to, during our leveling process, sacrifice the defenders for the 20% all res, which is going to be buffed by 60% to 32% all res while we are leveling, because that is going to make it much easier to switch out gear back and forth, especially our jewelries and our stuff that has resources. This is basically going to allow you to have a much more easier time of mix and matching your resistances to always be kept at 70% resistances on all of those. Then next up, we want to sacrifice our cold mages to deal more vulnerable damage. Last season, we were also able to sacrifice our shadow mages, which is and it had basically the same effect if we would do cold or shadow. This is not the case anymore because the ossified essence has been changed. So now you need to sacrifice the cold mages to get 15% more vulnerable damage. Since all of that is additive anymore, that's going to be just fine. And then for the golem, we want to sacrifice the iron golem to get 30% increased critical strike damage. For the season mechanic, Vampiric Powers, we get some really cool stuff for Bonespear Necromancer. Specifically, you can access that by clicking the MISC tab right here on the Max Roll Planner. That is again linked down below. And as you can see here, we are running Prey on the Weak to get more vulnerable damage, Hemomancy, which is probably the most OP power in the game when it comes to passively dealing damage. Then we want to have Ravenous to get more attack speed. That is depending on our total movement speed. And if you remember our gear, we do have a lot of movement speed on our gear, so that attack speed increase is going to be quite high. As you can see, current bonus 61%. That's quite a lot. Then Metamorphosis, because we want to have the Unstoppable. That is also going to trigger our Ghostwalker aspect, basically letting us run faster. And our Evade is going to cover a longer path, which is perfect for the wheelchair Necromancer. And then last but not least, Sanguine Brace, which is going to give us Fortify, which we never had access to before as Bonespear Necromancer. And on top of that, when we are fortified for half of our max life, then we get 8% critical strike chance, which is actually really, really easy to do, and 8% crit chance is very big. On top of that, when we are fortified, we actually get to dip into the Paragon Glyph Undaunted, which is going to increase our damage while we are being fortified and further reduce the damage that we are taking quite a lot. So this combination was not possible in Season 1, but is possible because of Sanguine Brace in Season 2. Most commonly, your combos or rotation is going to look like this. You will use your Corpse Tendrils, then Decrepify on top of that pull, or use your Iron Maiden, depending on if you are leveling or in the endgame. And then you are going to use the Bonespear until your mob pack that you pulled is dead. The most optimal rotation would be, which is definitely not necessary, but I have to include it in the build guide, just so you know how it would be perfectly played, which might come in handy on Uber Duriel, for example, or on T100 Nightmare Dungeon bosses or Uber Lilith. For this, you would actually activate 4 Corpse Explosions, then use your Corpse Tendrils, 1 more Corpse Explosion to trigger your Flesh Eater passive from the Paragon board, then Decrepify, then 1 Bone Splinters for the additional crit chance, and then Bone Spear until you don't have any more resource. To maximize the damage of your Bone Spear, it's really important to think about the positioning and where you are casting the Bone Spear. This is extremely important when you are pushing tier 100 Nightmare Dungeons or you're killing a boss that has high health, but it doesn't really have to be done all of the time. This is just if you want to really tickle the last little bit out of the damage that you have with Bone Spear. So obviously, whenever you are fighting an enemy, you are going to shoot your Bone Spear right through the target. This can be a boss, but this can also be a pack of mobs that you have pulled together with your corpse tendrils. And then obviously your first damage instance is going to damage the enemy with your Bone Spear. But the second portion and the main portion of your damage is going to be the Bone Spear shards, which I'm going to paint in orange right here. And as you can see, whenever you shot your Bone Spear right through the target and the max range was behind the enemy, then your returning Bone Spear shards are going to hit the enemy, therefore you have maximized your damage. But if in the second scenario the enemy is going to be a little bit closer to you, your Bone Spear is still going to fly the same distance, therefore ending up way more behind the target than in the first scenario. This is totally fine for your first damage instance of Bone Spear, but for the second instance of your Bone Spear damage, which is again the higher one, it is going to look like this. Therefore, 1/3 of your damage is only going to hit the enemy and the other 2/3 are going to go and miss the target. This is also going to be triggered with like 5 Bone Spears. When your first instance of Bone Spear crits, you will have 5 of these bone shards, but still, you still want to maximize hitting as many bone shards into your enemy as possible. So it doesn't really matter if you have 3 or if you have 5, the same concept applies. So to maximize your damage in this scenario, you would either kite back to go max distance of your Bone Spear again, so you would basically be transferred into scenario 1 again, or if you are really lucky, you will have a wall to one of the sides of the enemy, and then you are going to position yourself at the other side of the wall. Then you can easily shoot your Bone Spear at the wall. The wall is going to cap the max distance of your Bone Spear, and then the bone shards are again going to hit your enemy and are going to hit them with all of your damage, and you're not going to lose out on damage, even if you are close range compared to your first scenario. Biggest pro for the Bone Spear build is definitely that everything that is required in terms of aspects is in the codex. So therefore this makes it an extremely good leveling build, because every time you find an upgrade you can easily equip it, because you just go to the occultist and then reapply the missing aspect that you just have exchanged. One of the cons for some people might be that this is a ranged build, so you actively have to think about your positioning and also think about how you position for your Bone Spears. This is not everyone's favorite thing to do, so if you're a more melee-centric player, this is probably not the build for you. Another big con for this build are actually suppressor mobs. These basically cut your damage by more than 50% because your main portion of damage is actually coming from the returning part of the Bone Spears or Bone Splinters. Therefore, suppressor mobs are actually sometimes really hard to deal with. As you can see here in a tier 100 Nightmare Dungeon, these can become extremely dangerous, but after playing around it for a couple of times, you will actually get used to it. The best thing to do here is actually produce some corpses, then use a corpse tendrils, as you can see here, then go into melee because the mob will be stunned from your corpse tendrils, and then go ahead and spam Bone Spears until the enemy is dead. All in all, this build carried me to hardcore solo self-found rank 1 in the world at the start of season 2. I was really happy to do this with Bone Spear because I really like the build in season 1, and I also found 2 Uber uniques with more than around 30 Uber Duriel tries. I got extremely lucky here. The others that I have been running with, Woody and Condis, were nowhere near as lucky as I was. I got the Ring of Starless Skies and Andariel's Visage. If you want to see those live in action, I suggest you come check out the Twitch streams. They are going to be linked down below. And if you like content similar to this, make sure to subscribe to this YouTube channel, and I'll see you next time.